Welcome to the flight levels. 60 Minutes just aired a segment taking a closer look at the operations at Washington's Reagan Airport. They're specifically taking a look at that as a result of the crash between Blue Streak 5342 and an Army Black Hawk helicopter last year. Let's dive right in.
As the wreckage was pulled from the river, federal investigators began a year-long forensic autopsy of the collision. Video shows the American Airlines jet, seen here on the right of your screen, pulled up just before it and the Army helicopter collided.
So let's pause right there for a second. So this is the first time I've seen this particular security cam footage. I've had lots of people ask me about, did the pilots of either the helicopter or of the regional jet see each other? And based on this footage right here, you can clearly see the regional jet pitch up in the brief moment before the impact. So this clarifies, for me at least, that at the very least the pilots of the regional jet did see the helicopter at the last moment and tried to take an evasive maneuver, but as we know, unfortunately, it was too late.
There were obvious cracks in the system. There were obvious holes.
Emily Hanoka says she saw those holes during her time as an air traffic controller at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport.
Okay, well, they're talking about holes in the system. I'm very interested to hear what holes this controller is aware of. Let's see.
So you had frontline controllers ringing that bell for years and years saying, this is not safe. This cannot continue. Please change this. And that didn't happen.
For more than a decade, air traffic controllers warned the Federal Aviation Administration that the tempo of passenger jets and beehive of Army, police, and hospital helicopters near DCA was a recipe for disaster.
Controllers formed local safety councils, and every time that a controller made these safety reports, another controller was compiling data to back up the recommendation. And many recommendations were made, and they never went too far.
Well, you know, if that's true, that doesn't sound too good for the policymakers at the FAA. It looks like they're bringing receipts, like that this is definitely a problem, that helicopters are getting extremely close to airliners, and it's happening a lot, and supposedly they were sounding the alarm on this for a very long time. Not a good look.
DCA is unique. It's owned by the federal government, and the number of daily flights is ultimately determined by Congress. Since 2000, lawmakers added at least 50 flights to the already congested airport and approved another 10 in 2024.
Some hours are overloaded to the point where it's over the capacity that the airport can handle.
Was there pressure to get more planes in and out?
Yeah, there was definitely a pressure. If you do not move planes, you will gridlock the airport.
Now, that's an interesting comment because at some other facilities that I have been a part of, there has been a lot of pressure from upper management to do the exact opposite, where the controllers at the facilities I've been at, they have this, this spirit of duty of like, hey, if there's an opportunity to run more efficiently and get more operations to happen, then they're going to do it. And at the same time, management is telling them to, hey, back off. So this is interesting to hear. This is quite the opposite, where now we're in a situation where management is allegedly pushing controllers to increase capacity beyond what they're comfortable for. So that's very interesting to hear.
Restricted airspace near the airport shields the White House, the U.S. Capitol, and other government buildings. For years, funneling planes and helicopters into the same narrow corridor over the Potomac. And Hanoka showed us on her map of the airspace why the tarmac is just as tricky. There are only 3 short runways at DCA, and none are parallel.
And so if a plane's coming in, because these runways intersect, everything is connected.
Everything is connected. There is no independent operation at DCA.
I mean, that is true, but also I don't think that alone makes DCA special. There's plenty of very high volume airports with a single runway, such as San Diego, and like crossing runways definitely increases complexity, but that alone is not a sense of alarm. Let's see what else they've got.
DCA's main runway, runway 1, is the busiest in the country with over 800 flights a day, roughly one every minute. To make it work, Hanoka says air traffic controllers often relied on what they called a squeeze play.
A squeeze play is when everything is dependent on an aircraft rolling, an aircraft slowing, and you know it's going to be a very close operation.
So they're really just one's going up and one's going in at the same time?
And that is a really common operation.
Yeah, and that is completely true. However, I fail to see the danger of what they're calling the squeeze play. When they're doing this, they're following all of the rules and the guidance of the 7110.65 of separation on the runway. And people are commonly surprised at how close planes are allowed to be on the same runway. That's not a problem that two planes are on the same piece of runway as long as they have the right amount of separation. Now, this concept of somebody taking off and landing, or rather one plane landing and one plane taking off on the same runway, there is always an out. If for some reason there's a problem, you can always instruct the landing plane to perform a go-around. Also, within this system of safety, the pilots are also very aware of what all of the other airplanes are doing. And if any single pilot does not like what's happening, they can step in and say, unable, or they can initiate a go-around at any time. So there's multiple layers of safety built into this operation between both the controllers making decisions of what should happen, but then also the pilots validating that they are okay with every step of this situation. Now, one result of performing what they call squeeze plays is that there may be multiple airplanes who are intending to land that need to do a go-around maneuver to, potentially prevent a hazard, and those are inconvenient and they are a pain in the butt and they increase delays and all these things, but it's not a safety issue. So I'm sure there are safety issues, like we've talked about the helicopters flying too close, but this concept of a squeeze play, this seems like a bit of drama on behalf of CBS News, which their whole intent is to get people to watch this and get all fired up, and well played. It is a dramatic event, but I'm going to argue that squeeze plays are not a safety issue, whether at DC or at any airport.
Two airplanes on one runway within seconds of each other.
Is that normal at other airports?
No. So you'll get new controllers come in, so they've transferred from other facilities, and they'll look at the operation and say, absolutely not, and they'll withdraw from training. And that, when I was there, was about 50%.
50%?
About half of the people that walked in the building to train would say, absolutely not.
A year after the crash.
Yeah, and to talk about that squeeze play some more, if you're familiar with the rules of the 7110.65, you should be able to use those. And if there's controllers that are too chicken to use them, then I agree, that is some weak sauce. At the same time, that's their prerogative. Different controllers have different comfort levels, and if they want to keep planes more separated, from a safety standpoint, there's nothing wrong with that. But I have definitely been at airports as a pilot where the amount of separation that controllers gave me, I'll just say it was absurd, and it is frustrating when there are rules in place that are safe, and the controllers sometimes feel this need to apply extra separation because they feel like it, and I agree that is weak sauce.
Nearly 1/3 of the controller positions in the DCA tower are unfilled.
It was surprising walking into that work environment how close aircraft were.
Is it just kind of accepted there?
Yeah, this is what has to happen in order to make this airspace work, and it did work. it worked until it didn't.
In January, the NTSB.
Okay, so this is the important thing I want to bring across. So this segment is kind of mixing apples and oranges. On one hand, they are correctly bringing up the issue of the mix of traffic between helicopters and airplanes, which are very different aircraft with very different speeds, very different flight profiles, and yeah, apparently that is an issue. But then they're also throwing in the separation of airliner to airliner in here, which I'm arguing is, not a safety issue, no matter how dramatic they're making it sound. But let's have them focus on the airliner to helicopter aspect here.
NTSB determined the mid-air collision of Flight 5342 and the Black Hawk helicopter was preventable. In its 388-page report, investigators didn't identify a single cause of the accident. Rather, they called out systemic failures, including ignored warning signs about risks and a helicopter route that was designed so poorly that in some parts of the sky, it allowed for just 75 feet of vertical separation between helicopters and passenger jets.
Yeah, and I agree with that one completely. I remember in the days after this crash happened, taking a look at that specific helicopter route on the helicopter chart and seeing that it passed basically right across final at the altitudes it had, and what? I could see the route being there, fine, but then I would assume that would mean, arrivals on that runway are prohibited while a helicopter is on that route, and to find out that, oh no, they are simultaneously happening at the same time, what? That shocked me as well.
During his 20 years in the Army, Tim Lilly flew Black Hawk helicopters often down the Potomac River near DCA. The night of the crash, investigators say the Black Hawk crew was relying on what's called visual separation, literally just looking out the window to avoid nearby passenger jets.
Yeah, did you hear how she said that? Literally looking out the window, very dramatic. If you're familiar with this channel, I have brought up several times that visual separation is a perfectly acceptable form of separation, and it is not a dramatic thing. Now, as we're going to see in a moment here, they're going to talk a little bit more about it and the conditions needed for it. So let's keep watching.
To apply visual separation, the pilot has to positively identify the other aircraft.
And say, that's the plane you're talking about.
That's the plane. And he has to maintain constant surveillance on that aircraft, which is impossible under these conditions.
Yeah, and that's right. So the deal with visual separation is, let's say you have two different aircraft, whether airplane to airplane, airplane to helicopter, whatever combination. One of the participants needs to verbally say, yep, I have the other aircraft in sight and I will maintain visual separation. And then at that point, the controller will transfer responsibility of separation to that pilot that accepted that responsibility. And then moving forward, it is that pilot's responsibility to keep the other aircraft in sight and to maneuver their own airplane however they need to not hit the other one. If for whatever reason they're unable to see the other aircraft or they're unable to comply with this condition, then they need to get back to the controller so that the controller can start applying their own radar separation. So separation is always applied 100% of the time. It was initiated as radar separation from the controller, then it is transferred to one of or both of the pilots, and then at the conclusion of that, it is back to radar separation. So when a pilot takes on this responsibility, it is a serious commitment, and you have to comply with it because the other pilot is counting on you. Okay, let's keep going.
He says because the crew was likely wearing night vision goggles, which Lilly says limit what a pilot can see.
Help people out with this at home, because I think we've all watched enough movies where you see somebody put on night vision goggles and they can see everything. But that's not the case.
Especially under these conditions, that's not the case. So when you have a lot of bright lights like you do in, Washington, D.C. area, everything gets washed out through the goggles.
Air 1 Washington.
Okay, so I'm going to connect the dots here. So, like I've said, if you cannot keep the other aircraft in sight the whole time, and you cannot guarantee that you are not going to hit that other airplane, then you cannot accept responsibility for visual separation. It is that simple. Now, what it sounds like, based on not only this segment, but also from other places I've seen, is that these pilots are being asked, hey, do you see this other traffic? Can you maintain visual separation? And they will just by default say, oh yeah, sure, I see them and I'll maintain visual separation, without knowing that they actually have the ability to accept all of those conditions. They just say it to get the controller off their back. And that culture is horrendously dangerous, and it seems very clear that that culture led to these events that we're talking about here.
This was a system that failed the people on the aircraft, on the helicopter, in the air traffic control tower.
Jennifer Homendy is the chairwoman of the NTSB. After a year-long investigation, the agency suggested 50 safety recommendations to prevent similar accidents.
If everybody knows those goals are dangerous, then why didn't anybody step in and say, we have to lighten the load here? The air traffic control tower the entire time was saying, we have a real safety problem here, and nobody was listening. It was like,
yeah, just like the controller earlier in the segment brought up, like they saw lots of close calls and they reported it, and at least as far as I could see, not a whole lot was done about it. So not great.
somebody was asleep at the switch or didn't want to act. It is a bureaucratic nightmare.
Immediately after the accident, the FAA moved some helicopter routes away from DCA and ended the use of visual separation.
Yeah, and that was a moment of mixed feelings for me, because as you know, I think visual separation works as long as everybody plays by the rules, but I feel this is a very clear example that, you know, if you can't play by the rules, you don't get to have those privileges anymore. And I think that was the right move, that there were too many players not following the rules, so that privilege needed to go away.
This month, it expanded that ban to busy airports across the country. In a statement to 60 Minutes, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said he's helped secure more than $12 billion to, quote, aggressively overhaul our air traffic control system.
Okay, don't even get me started on this whole brand new air traffic control system, because I am still waiting to hear exactly, you know, what problems Mr. Duffy is looking to solve. They just keep saying like, oh, there's things that are broken, so we're going to throw money at it. But like, specifically, what is the problem, and specifically, how are you going to fix it, sir? And I haven't heard it yet.
But the problems at DCA continue. Since the crash, 60 Minutes has learned at least 4 times aircraft and helicopters have gotten too close, triggering safety reports.
It is unconscionable that we are having to be here right now.
Some of the families of Flight 5342 are now fixtures on Capitol Hill, advocating for aircraft surveillance technology that might have saved their loved ones. Jennifer Hahn.
And that's a great point. And this is one of the recommendations that the NTSB brought up, that the Black Hawk helicopter in particular was not using ADSB out. And as far as I know, there are very few military aircraft in DC or elsewhere that are broadcasting ADSB out. And you know, I understand that the military has a specific mission, and they need to have some level of secrecy over their locations and their missions. But if they're sharing airspace with civilians, like, they need to be using the same technology and the same rules that civilians are. And so I hope that the military will start using ADSB out. At the same time, I do appreciate they have a specific mission, and part of that might be, you know, where their location is not known by, you know, so easily. So I hope we can find some balance there.
Says if the FAA and lawmakers don't move quickly on safety legislation, they are clearing the path for another disaster.
I imagine most of them fly in and out of DCA. They do. So what would you say if they were listening? I'd say, why do we always have to wait until people die to take action?
And unfortunately, that statement has been the case for decades. I don't know what the answer to that is, but that is how things roll in this country and the rest of the world is, you know, there's no urgency until people die. And I would love to see that change. And I do think the change of removing visual separation at airports is a step in the right direction. I think it's too bad that they had to do that. I think visual separation can be used appropriately and can be a great tool for everybody to get operations moving faster. But, you know, if we can't use it responsibly, then it does need to be taken away. And I think that was an excellent move. So in closing, I'd like to take a moment to express my condolences to the victims of this horrible accident, as well as their families. None of this needed to happen. And I'd also like to take a moment to express my feelings towards the controllers on shift that night. This was an awful event to you guys as well, and you guys have been dragged through the mud in the year after this event. So what do you guys think? Do you feel 60 Minutes did an appropriate job bringing light to the operations at Washington Reagan? Do you feel they were overly dramatic? Let me know in the comments. All right, be sure to check out flight-levels.com, and remember, don't just fly, climb to the flight levels.